Greetings, and welcome to the first collaboration between myself and the Muser. So, as you probably guessed, this is Hondo Moonrazor and the Muser, here presenting Asajj Ventress versus Darth Nyriss. This is the kind of fight that I like to think Jin Sarai would approve of. A relatively minor character, a real well-known and liked character, and a matchup that doesn't really spring to mind immediately, but makes quite a bit of sense once you think about it. So, submitted for your approval, the Assassin versus the Sith Lord. Who wins, Nyriss or Ventress? Let's find out. From Lord Scourge to Mara Jade to Darth Talon, the Dark Lords of the Sith have a long-held tradition of using agents as their hands to carry out their will across the galaxy. Darth Tyrannus was no exception, and he was served by one of the most infamous, Asajj Ventress. Although born on Dathomir, she was given away as a slave to a Rataki crime lord. Her master was killed not long after, and Ventress was taken in by the stranded Jedi Kai Narek, who instructed her as his apprentice. When Narek was slain by criminals, Ventress went berserk and unfortunately fell to the dark side and began a campaign of ruthless conquest across Ratatak, eventually murdering all her rival warlords and subjugating the planet to her rule. When Count Dooku arrived on the infamous Gladiator planet in search of a replacement for Jango Fett, Ventress saw an opportunity to gain more power as his disciple. Although the Count dismissed her claims to the title of Sith, Asajj Ventress did become Dooku's apprentice and his primary agent. Fueled by a hatred for the Jedi Order for abandoning her master, Ventress became one of the most feared beings in the galaxy, as a high-ranking Separatist commander and Jedi hunter. This did not prevent the Count from attempting to execute her, however, bowing to his own master's will. Ventress survived and went on to become both a Night Sister and later a freelance bounty hunter, but it was during her time as a Dark Alkalite she would play her largest role in galactic history.
In the years before the resurgent Sith Empire attacked the Republic, a Dark Council, made up of the most powerful Sith, were the overseers of the Empire, who directly reported to the Sith Emperor himself. One of the most important members of the Dark Council was Darth Nyriss, who was a senior member of the Council. For years, she faithfully served the Emperor. However, Nyriss and several other members of the Council decided to overthrow the Emperor, seeing his plans to attack the Republic as madness that would doom the Empire. Unfortunately, she was betrayed by the Sith Lord, Scourge, who reported her to the Emperor. Nyriss was furious by this betrayal and attempted to kill Scourge. However, Scourge had freed the famed Jedi, Revan, who had been Nyriss's prisoner for many years, and with the help of the Jedi exile, Meetra Surik, Revan ultimately slew Nyriss. However, Nyriss's reputation as an important figure in galactic history is well earned.
Asajj Ventress was, let's just say, a near-human female. In all honesty, neither Dathomirians or Ratataki have any advantages over your standard human anyway, so it ultimately doesn't matter that much. Regardless of what race she actually is native to, Asajj Ventress has a slender build, pale white skin, shaved head, and stood 1.8 meters tall. Surprisingly, her age has never been established by any official source, although it is obvious she was in her physical prime, somewhere between 20 and 40 years of age. As with most duelists of her physical build, Ventress's greatest advantages were her agility and speed. The former informed a majority of her fighting style, while the latter allowed her to fight on even footing with the exceptionally fast duelists Count Dooku and Mace Windu. Ventress's strength is not clearly defined, although she was obviously not a strength-oriented fighter and was overpowered with relative ease by the likes of Anakin Skywalker. Her toughness and endurance were impressively advanced, however, and she has survived injuries that would have finished off even other trained Force sensitives. Asajj was also experienced in the realm of unarmed combat, which would obviously improve her physical abilities. Ventress physically embodies her role as an assassin, quick, nimble, and unrelenting.
Darth Nyriss was a female Sith pureblood of indeterminate age at the time of her death. Although she was noted as one of the Dark Council's most senior members, having been there for 20 years. The Sith purebloods were the original inhabitants of Korriban, and with the exiled Dark Jedi, they founded the Sith Order. Sith purebloods were often born with high levels of Force sensitivity. The species has also been gifted with both a long lifespan compared to other species, being able to live for 500 plus years, and impressive resilience to physical damage. Although when Lord Scourge originally saw her, he was somewhat taken aback by her elderly and disheveled appearance. He did note, however, that she was probably much younger than she appeared, and her appearance was due to dark side degradation. Although she probably wasn't in her physical prime, she was still capable of moving with the speed and ferocity of a dark side warrior, showing that Nyriss was not to be underestimated. Although Ventress has displayed reasonable levels of speed, strength, and agility, Nyriss's advantage due to her species give her a distinct edge. For this reason, Nyriss gets the physical edge.
Although I cannot speak for my collaborator, the only personal lightsabers I prefer over Ventress's are those wielded by Ezra Bridger and Exar Kun. For those unaware, Ventress utilized a set of curved-hilted paired lightsabers with uniform hilt design. Her original Jedi-style weapons are only notable for their inconsistently portrayed blade colors, but the paired lightsabers have a number of advantages. The curved hilts provided ergonomic benefits and a slight advantage in a duel. The weapons could be joined at the hilt to create a uniquely angled saber style, although she only rarely took advantage of this feature. Ventress preferred the dual-wielding approach, although she could still effectively fight with either alternative mode. The blades sported blood-red blades, likely produced by Sith-style artificial crystals, signifying Asajj Ventress's allegiance to the dark side. An interesting, if ultimately inconsequential, side note is that the weapons originally possessed by Kumari Vosa are not the same ones Ventress utilized throughout the rest of her career. Yes, these are the same lightsabers originally gifted to her by Dooku. However, even if she somehow recovered these after her defeat on Yavin 4, there is very little chance she reclaimed the blade she lost on Teth or either weapon after her disastrous duel with Anakin on Coruscant. Given the relatively generic design of her paired blades, however, it wouldn't have been that difficult for her to simply replace any lost blade. Although Ventress herself admitted to preferring the yellow-bladed lightsaber she adopted as a freelancer, it is her second pair of lightsabers that stood out as the more effective armament, on a purely technical level at least.
Darth Nyriss wielded a standard lightsaber with a single, red-tinted blade. The lightsaber likely used a red, synthetic crystal as the focusing lens. The standard lightsaber was the most common variety of lightsaber among the Jedi and the Sith. It did not possess any of the advantages or disadvantages attributed to many other exotic varieties of lightsabers.
Out of all the categories, weapons and equipment is the one with the most readily evident advantage. Neither combatant wears armor or carries alternative weaponry, so it comes down to their personal lightsabers themselves. Although Nyriss's weapon isn't any worse than a standard lightsaber, it's no better either, and ultimately isn't anything to write home about. Asajj Ventress's paired curved blades, on the other hand, improves upon a standard lightsaber in almost every way, with a number of advantages, no offsetting weaknesses, and is very much so something to write home about. Asajj Ventress gets a significant advantage in terms of weapons and equipment. Out of all the various Dark Acolytes and other miscellaneous fighters serving the Confederacy of Independent Systems during the Clone Wars, the only two who could even hope to challenge Asajj Ventress in the dueling ring were General Grievous and Sora Bulk. If I could only use one word to describe her fighting capability, it would be lethal. As a Jedi, Ventress was instructed in at least one of the 7 classic forms of lightsaber combat. Although which specific form has never been confirmed, it is generally theorized to be a Taru, Nyman, or both. Ataru, the fourth form of lightsaber combat, was based around agility and offensive swordplay, overwhelming one's opponents outright. Nyman, the sixth form, was a jack-of-all-trades style, retaining elements from all 5 previous forms and with a specific focus on training force powers into one's swordplay. I have to agree with the common consensus here, as the maneuvers and tactics of both these forms are readily evident in Ventress's fighting. Once beginning her tutelage under Count Dooku, however, Ventress followed his example and adapted Form 2, Makashi, as her primary method of combat. Makashi was bred for blade-to-blade combat, with heavy focus on foot and quick, precise strikes. Although Ventress's take on the style was described as sloppy and amateurish, this only applies when in comparison to Dooku's absolute mastery of the form. When examined on its own merits, Ventress's style is clearly anything but. The last tool at her disposal, as far as forms and style goes, is Jar Kai, a spin-off of Nyman focused solely on the use of dual blades. This was clearly Ventress's preferred method of fighting, as her skills with a single blade were less developed, and she only really used the saber staff for its shock value. Asajj Ventress was also fond of using force powers and physical strikes in the midst of her blade sequences, no doubt taking advantage of her training in Ataru and Nyman. None of the forms attributed to Ventress have any kind of focus on blast deflection, and while she wasn't weak in this area, she wasn't the best either. On the upside, she has been seen as more than skilled enough to deal with multiple foes at once, even when said high-level Jedi Knights. First and foremost, Ventress was an assassin, and this clearly shaped her entire skill set. On the one hand, this makes her extremely skilled at stealth-based tactics and the dueling abilities required to dispatch single combatants. On the other hand, in my view, this does limit her effectiveness as a straightforward warrior, at least when compared to her counterparts among the Jedi Order. The best evidence of this is a comparison between Ventress as a Confederate assassin and Ventress as a Night Sister warrior. As the former, she was all but stomped when pitted against General Grievous in a head-to-head engagement. As the latter, after training and developing for some time on Dathomir, she not only contended with but actually defeated the general. However, this is not to say that Ventress as a Separatist agent is a pushover. Far from it. She was still an extremely skilled duelist, on par with several members of the Jedi High Council. Speaking of which, Ventress has an impressive track record as a swordmaster, with almost 24 Jedi kills to her name. Naturally, the most notable contests of skill Ventress have been involved in have been against her most famous rivals, the Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. By my count, she has been pitted against one or the other, or even both at once, at least 10 times throughout the war. However, for all her ability, Ventress was ultimately neither's equal, never managing a victory against them through pure swordplay even once. In fact, despite Ventress's own obsession, if you asked the Jedi who their most persistent foes were, they would most likely answer Dooku and Grievous, respectively. Given this, we will be looking at some of her other duels to get a better idea of just what she was capable of. On the downside, Dooku had little difficulty utterly schooling her upon their first meeting. Mace Windu openly declared himself her superior, a sentiment Ventress even agreed with. Plo Koon dominated his duel with her even while suffering from a broken arm, and Jedi Masters Luminary Undulian Aayla Secura at the very least forced her to flee by working together. On the upside, Ventress has defeated Luminary Unduli and Kakrak in single combat, bested the talented Padawan Ashoka Tano on multiple occasions, and even got the better of Kit Fisto on Ord Cestus. Given that Fisto was one of the best swordmasters the Jedi had to offer, even managing to stand toe-to-toe with Darth Sidious for several minutes, in the novelization at least, this speaks volumes about what Ventress is capable of.
Darth Nyriss was primarily a Force wielder, who would have trained with the Sith Inquisitors of Vidiot's old Sith Empire. However, she was powerful and highly capable as a lightsaber duelist. Although no source confirms Nyriss' style, we can deduce from her highly aggressive blade work that she was primarily a practitioner of Juyo. Juyo is an entirely aggressive lightsaber form, based around overwhelming your opponents with a furious series of attacks, drawn from the emotions of the user. Nyriss also used Force abilities frequently, showing possible evidence of the Nyman form, which was a balanced form that focused on the integration of Force attacks into lightsaber sequences. Nyriss' typical approach when beginning a fight would be to take the offensive initiative and force her opponents back to dominate the fight. She would also use force abilities to keep them off balance. Nyriss was skilled enough to fight both Lord Scourge and Meetra Surik at once and essentially outclass them in a duel. However, this fight did take place inside of a dark side force nexus, which would have empowered Nyriss by giving her an external source of energy to draw upon. And although the same would have been true for Scourge, Meetra would have been hampered by the nexus. It is also worth mentioning that this is Lord Scourge and Meetra Surik, neither of them probably being at their prime. Lord Scourge would have been many years before his prime. And although Meetra Surik probably would have been in her prime, as I mentioned, she was probably hampered by the Darkside Force Nexus. Regardless, Darth Nyriss was a highly skilled lightsaber duelist.
This is much closer than it may appear at first. Yes, Asajj Ventress easily outstrips Darth Nyriss in terms of experience, and she has much greater focus on martial arts in general and lightsaber dueling in particular. However, Nyriss is much more capable than she appears at first, and has effectively engaged opponents on Ventress's level of skill before. Nyriss may not be capable of much of what Ventress has demonstrated, but she can effectively deal with most of what Ventress will be throwing at her. In terms of how their skill sets compare, we do have more information and clarification on how Ventress fights, but not much that suggests she has an inherently superior method of fighting to Darth Nyriss. Her multiple forms give her a varied and diverse style, but Nyriss' superior capability at using the Force in the midst of a duel, often as her main method of combat even, can go a long way to compensating for this. Blade work is clearly on Ventress' side, but Nyriss can again compensate for this with a keen tactical mind and judicious application of the Force. Just to be clear here, this edge really isn't in much doubt. Ventress has far more natural talent, greater diversity of skill and talents, and is all around the more refined and powerful duelist of the two. What I am trying to make clear here is that this is not a one-sided duel. Darth Nyriss is good enough to give Ventress a good fight, and pose a major threat to the younger assassin. However, the most likely victor of a prolonged duel or even a pure martial contest is certainly Ventress. Nyriss can deal with much of what Asajj has at her disposal, but she cannot respond in kind. And in terms of the world of lightsaber dueling, that is a fatal weakness. What's more, force powers do not actually factor into the dueling category, so Darth Nyriss is left on her back foot against a foe who simply outclasses her own ability. Asajj Ventress gets the edge in martial arts. If Asajj Ventress had received full formal training from either the Jedi or Sith orders, I have very little doubt that she would be one of the most viable and powerful masters of the Force of her era. As is, she wields a lot of raw, untempered power, but suffers from a severe lack of refinement. This is not to say she is uneducated or running blind as a Force user, far from it. She simply doesn't have the same level of training others do, which leaves her as simply extremely powerful, rather than unimaginably powerful. The most frequently used, well-developed, and powerful tool in Ventress' Force arsenal was easily telekinesis. As previously mentioned, Ventress had little trouble wielding this power in the midst of heated duels, and has shown a knack for quick, precise uses of this power. Ventress was not only a highly intelligent fighter, but a sorcerer as well, employing her powers whenever her opponent left themselves open, or the terrain itself provided an advantage. She was not straight-up power and magnitude either. She could toss about massive stones and trees with constant ease, and even Jedi Force shields were penetrated with relative ease. If given the chance to gather her power, Ventress could send objects upwards of several tons, or even Jedi Knights flying. As a high-level dark side adept, Ventress was adept in using telekinetic strangulation, or force choke if you so prefer, for torture and even to kill. On the flip side, Asajj Ventress did not have the most powerful force shield, and most of the powers she herself utilized could in turn be effectively employed against her. This is most evident in her extremely short engagement with Grandmaster Yoda. Rather than waste time fighting her blade to blade, Yoda simply disarms her of her weapons, studies them, and then returns them, without displaying any hint of strain or meeting resistance. Count Dooku was also more than capable of telekinetically freshing her, and apparently employed the same tactic of not instructing her in how to use or defend against Sith lightning as he did with Savage Opress, leaving him with an ace in the hole if she ever attacked him. Despite a complete lack of any energy-based force powers, Ventress was apparently instructed in other Sith-based techniques, such as healing trances and the aforementioned Force Choke. Whatever ability she used to resurrect and control a large group of corpses also likely stems from her brief instruction in Sith teachings. As an assassin, Ventress also mastered stealth-based force powers, although she could be found out by those who actively searching for her. Asajj Ventress was an aggressive user of telepathy as well, using the basic mind trick in a much more brutal method than most. Although I personally disagree with the sentiment that Ventress is a more capable Force user than, say, Anakin Skywalker, there are ironically a number of similarities between their respective skill sets.
Darth Nyriss was a powerful Force wielder. She could use physical augmentation to boost her speed, strength, and agility. She was capable of powerful telekinesis, even being able to send Lord Scourge flying across the room with a Force push. She also had impressive magnitude with Force Lightning, using it not only to kill her enemies, but to turn them into smoking husks. Although she has only demonstrated this magnitude inside of a dark side Force Nexus, meaning that she was probably not quite as powerful as she appeared here. It is also worth noting that she used Force Lightning multiple times in a single, relatively short confrontation, showing that she preferred it heavily. Nyriss was even able to create Force Lightning so powerful that whenever she sent it flying towards Revan and he redirected it towards her, it turned her into ash. Nyriss was also capable of summoning a powerful Force barrier. When Lord Scourge tried to send Nyriss flying with a Force push, it didn't even stagger her. Darth Nyriss is also credited with being a powerful sorcerer. Although we don't see any of her abilities in combat, it is possible that she never employed any of her abilities because she didn't need to. She was already dominating the fight, so there was no purpose to using any of her Sith sorcery. Although this is mild speculation on my part. Either way, Darth Nyriss was an extremely powerful Force wielder. This is not a particularly difficult section to judge. Both have physical augmentation. Both Nyriss and Ventress have a powerful telekinesis that can break force barriers and hit their opponents directly. However, Nyriss has a much more powerful force barrier of her own to fall back on, while Ventress would be easy prey for Nyriss' own telekinetic attacks. Although Ventress might be able to strike Nyriss directly, it would not be nearly as effective as Nyriss' own attacks. Also, Nyriss' magnitude with Force Lightning is like nothing Ventress has ever seen. And considering her track record when fighting opponents with Force Lightning, this would be used to great effect, particularly when considering how much Nyriss favors it. Even if my assumptions on Nyriss' Sith sorcery are entirely wrong, Nyriss still gets the clear edge in Force ability. This match would probably be a relatively short but brutal encounter. Let's say this fight takes place on the desert world of Tatooine. The fight would begin with Nyriss charging at Ventress and would meet her blade to blade, where Ventress would take an early advantage. However, Nyriss would not hesitate to fall back on her Force ability. She would likely begin using Force Lightning frequently, and Ventress would either go down there or evade. However, Ventress cannot avoid Nyriss' assaults for long, and as the fight continues, Ventress eventually gets hit by a bolt of Force Lightning, and she goes down. Therefore, we declare Darth Nyriss, the senior member of the Dark Council, the victor. Of course, guys, this is just our opinion. Please leave your own thoughts and comments in the comment section below. I would like to give a massive thank you to Hondo Moonrazor. It was fantastic working with him, and he creates great content. So go check him out by clicking here, or you can find his link in the description below. Also, thanks to Emma Sardi for helping me with the editing on this video. You can find his link here as well, or in the description below. Well guys, I hope you've enjoyed, and we will see you guys next time.